Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to Ridgeview's podcast, where we like to cover everything hope, healing, and recovery related. We're so glad you joined us. As always, a friendly reminder to subscribe to the podcast and ring the bell so that you receive our latest weekly episode. I'd like to draw your attention to our COVID helpline. For those that may be tuning in as a podcast, that is 833-503-0348. We'll provide that number again at the end of the show. We're delighted to continue our conversation. My guest, Brandon Knight. I think several weeks ago, Brandon, we were talking about families
Yes, sir.
and coping and dealing with what's been a hard 2020 and what we can do leaning into a new year. And we thought we'd just kind of pick up where we left off.
It's a good topic.
Yeah, I continue to learn a lot about parenting, and what it means to be a family. Yeah, we thought, maybe this would be kind of a cool topic to just continue the conversation. We were kind of thinking about, what a struggle it's been for families to identify themselves as happy. That seems to be a difficult task in the last year, certainly heading into the new year. And so this book, Bruce Feiler had written The Secrets of Happy Families, and there's a lot of rich content in here. I'm a big fan of how people start books. I don't read a lot of these, more novels, and Pat Conroy, as we were talking about before we started. His book, The Prince of Tides, begins with, "My wound is geography. It is my anchor and my port of call." And I've loved it since the first time I read it, and I've memorized it ever since. But Bruce begins this book referencing the way Tolstoy opened his book, Anna Karenina, which I've never read. I think that thing is maybe 5 inches thick, so it looks pretty intimidating. But he begins with this quote, "Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Well, it had me wondering, like, wow, that's a interesting way to begin a book. But I suspect there's a lot of truth. There are a lot of families that may be thinking, how can I be part of, help feed a happier family? And his advice that comes out of his research and his studies, this is all pre-COVID, of course, seemed to be an interesting thing to talk about. So he highlights three, what I think the summary is, what happy families consistently do. And I thought we'd just take each one, kind of talk about it and what it might look like for a family. Number one was adapt all the time. You think families had to adapt all the time in 2020?
I mean, I think we always do, but yeah, the last year was nothing but adapting all the time.
It's sort of reassuring to me, actually, that, maybe family happiness is more art than science, and that you're constantly creating, that there's not really just one cookbook about, you follow these instructions and directions and the formula will work for you. You have to adapt.
And he says that in his book, actually. He makes a comment about how there's no single gesture, that we have to take micro steps to building this concept of a happy family. And you have to be flexible and agile. And I really liked that. One of the things he said, actually, that wasn't like professional sounding, but was to tinker with it all the time. And I thought back over my last year with my family of helping to take care of my elderly mother, having 2 teenage sons, having 2 daughters that are, below 10 years old. There is no set formula. Things are chaotic all the time, and so adjusting and adapting it's necessary, 100%.
I had forgotten that use of that word tinker, but that's perfect. I think for folks that may be tuning in or listening and wondering, well, what do, we're way off track. I can't remember the last time I felt or experienced happiness. Tinker, just play with it, adjust a little bit.
Take
you don't
a small
have,
step.
yeah, small step, small
Build
step.
on the wins.
So, do you have an example of one thing that maybe you guys tinkered with in 2020 or that you tinkered with yesterday? That
For me, it was scheduling. I am a routine guy. I am a checklist guy, so I kind of know what I'm doing every day, all day. And up until 2020, especially my older children, we all kind of followed that same regimen. We knew what we were doing when we woke up. Everything was outlined. That didn't work anymore because one child may be doing virtual learning and one child may not. And I may be working in the office this day and working from home the next day. It was chaotic. I'm just going to keep using that word. It was chaotic. So just tinkering with schedules and not being so rigid. Back to that flexibility, that was key for us.
yeah. I mean, part of what he seems to be saying is, give yourself permission to adjust. You don't have to have the solution, but experimenting with different things is actually a healthy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I love that. Tinker, adapt all the time. Well, the second thing he says, what happy families consistently do is they talk a lot. Now, in a year of social distancing, of face coverings, talking, well, there were certain challenges that were presented by doing that. We couldn't talk in the ways that maybe we had grown accustomed to. Well, what did you think about his advice there?
He hit some highlights, to communicate effectively, creating a family narrative, and to build a hopeful foundation. And I thought those were great points. To elaborate on them a little bit, the communicating effectively, he said something that he used from a personal case study of his own, but it wasn't just having a talk. It was having a series of talks. And I've thought about that so much with my older kids, right? That used to be you would say something to them or I would say something to them, and that was kind of A, B, C. And if it needed to be revisited later, then it was revisited. But on a need-to basis, and maybe it's just because they're getting older, or maybe it's because we had some stay-at-home orders for a while and we were spending so much more time together. But it became we talked about this on Monday, and there was a follow-up on Tuesday. I would re-engage them on Friday. They would re-engage me on Sunday. And it was really healthy, really beneficial communication. So I think not dropping the ball and assuming that something is just being communicated and it's done, but to keep that series of talks is really important. With all my kids, technology and communication has become a big thing over the last year. So my oldest, especially, he works now. I have a child who has a job, but he works in the evenings, and so we don't see each other for stretches now during the day. But texting has become like the equivalent of a note in a lunchbox for a middle school child, so we text a lot, and I think it just keeps that open communication flowing. It lets us both know that we're thinking about each other, thinking about things that are important to each other. FaceTime has become a thing. So it is not uncommon with the 4 kids in the house to see somebody running around at any given time with a video going. It was a little stressful at first because I'm not a tech guy. I'm not tech savvy. But I'm smiling just thinking about it because it's better communication. It's effective communication.
Well, that would be a neat way of amplifying the a lot part is that, talking is taken different forms.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned texting and certainly FaceTiming. I think one of the things that sort of stood out to me was the talking doesn't always have to be, it's broad in its type. So it doesn't always, talking doesn't always have to be agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, and it also doesn't always have to be fighting, that it can be a broad range of communication. I think one of the things that you mentioned made me think of one of the themes that we discussed previously, and that is, the openness kind of begs the curiosity aspect. One way to promote more talking is simply to have curiosity
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on in your life, or what you're observing today, or how you're feeling, or how you're thinking, or what's troubling you, or what's got you smiling, and the list goes on and on and on. A level of curiosity about one another helps promote talking
Mm-hmm.
all the time. Yeah, it's as we discussed before. Our kids are at different ranges, and mine have now flown the coop, so to speak. So now the invitation is for my wife and I to talk
Mm-hmm.
a lot, which is, it's now different in a new way,
Sure.
and also can lead to a lot of smiling,
I was getting ready to say the same thing. You're glowing over there.
but also some healthy debates. Oh yes, my hobbies and interests. Okay, well that's good. Number 3, what happy families can consistently do is go out and play. What'd you get out of that?
Actually, you just said your hobbies and interests, and the biggest takeaway I had from number 3 in there was he makes a comment about whatever makes you happy, doing it with your other family members will generate a happy family. And to go back to this theme of 2020, I thought about that a lot. That prior to that, my kids had their time where they did their things, and I had my time where I did my things. And certainly we spent time together, but our individual interests, we spent doing a lot of those things independently, right? My time. Come 2020, it wasn't that easy to do anymore. If I wanted to go to the garage for 2 hours and work out, good chance one of my kids was coming to ask me something or show me something. And eventually, we've talked about that. They became engaged in that process too. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time focusing on is exploring new activities, things that we didn't necessarily do before, or things that we liked but we didn't have enough time, where we've tried to amplify those situations. And then just doing things with each other. My youngest son likes to draw anime, cartoons type stuff. I can't draw a stick figure, but I now love to sit down and look over what he's doing with him, engage in that process. I sanded and restained a kitchen table over the weekend, and my kids, on their own, got involved in that process. So then there was this time consumption thing, but we were talking about what it led to and what their interests were with maybe exploring woodworking in the future. And that was my thing, but to incorporate it as a family event, at least part of it, was really refreshing. So I think that's a big thing. Whatever is making you happy, to share that, engage that with the other person, builds a good bond.
I think you brought up in one of our earlier episodes just how important it is to, especially if you're feeling low down, depressed, sad, hopeless, to actually remember things that you derived enjoyment from in life, remembering what those things are and doing them again. And I think part of what you're saying is tapping back into the play that you derive satisfaction from. And over the chronic stress, strain, fatigue of 2020, that became harder and harder for people to do. And I think families, part of going out and playing, back to point number 1, adapting all the time, is maybe the things that you played before, maybe you can't do like you could, so adapt your play into a new way. Um, yeah, that's. I think it's an excellent one. I do wonder, what kind of advice Bruce would give to families, or even just to people, couples. They're a family who are really struggling. They're exhausted. They they can't remember the last time they felt happy. Uh, a lot of these prescribed things may sound trite. Well, adapt, play, talk. That'll work. Everyone feels unhappy for different reasons, some for the same reasons. What sort of advice do you think he would give?
I think it would go back to incorporating all three of these again. Not that there's a set formula or used cookbook. There's no recipe for everybody, but take those micro steps. And I really think that a lot of us see these how-to books, and we don't engage in them. But the takeaway can be really beneficial. So just if you're feeling unhappy, talking to your partner, talking to your parents, talking to your kids, that communication is going to be essential, because if you don't, you're stuck with that. You're carrying that burden all by yourself. And family is there to support. Adapting to whatever the current situation is, I think, is probably has always been necessary, but it really is right now and over the last year. And with this go out and play, I mean, you're right, 2020 confined us a lot. But if your thing was hiking, nobody's saying you can go hike Everest today. You may not feel like it, you may not have the means to do it, but go to the park, be outdoors, take that small step to do something. And an overarching theme that I see with all of this, just as a human being, that I made as a notation as a number 4, is to reduce stress. I think all of this would require you trying to reduce stress, and that's very much easier said than done on any given day. But I think that's the biggest essential. If you can identify stressful situations and limit them, reduce them, that I think is obviously going to produce more happiness. If you're happier, your family is going to be happier. Found a study that I thought was really amazing, where the Families and Work Institute interviewed about 3,000 kids, all under the age of 10, a few years ago, and asked them what their number one wish would be for their parents, for their family unit. And the lady running the study said that she anticipated the answer to be, spend more time with me, the child, right? And that makes sense. But the overwhelming number one answer was they wanted their parents to reduce being stressed and tired. And so I think that shows a trickle-down effect of, if you're coming home from work and you're cooking dinner and you're doing the laundry, and then all you want to do is sit down for 15 minutes before bedtime, there's probably not a whole lot of going out and playing. There's probably not a whole lot of good, effective talking and communication, and you're probably not adapting because you're too worn out. So just finding some way to reduce that stress, I think, would have a beneficial impact all the way around.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully said. I think at one point in his conclusion, he offers this: happiness isn't to be found; it is to be made.
Yep.
Be really nice to go in the backyard and dig a hole and find that little gem of happiness, and I got it. But that is the stages of change that you're talking about, with tinkering, small steps, acting on, being better, getting better. Can a helpline like what the COVID helpline be a resource for folks that may be just needing to talk? Part of this talk a lot, might that be a resource for folks?
Absolutely. Reach out at any time. I mean, if you're looking to reduce stress, we have advice for that. We can help walk you through that. We can point you in the direction of resources that may be beneficial to whatever situation they would be going through in the moment. But we've talked about this before. Just talking, just venting, and knowing that your feelings are being validated, that you have somebody to communicate with that will communicate back to you on what you're going through. And maybe the fact that it's somebody that you don't even know, maybe that's beneficial too, as a first step, as that micro step to addressing whatever the concern is. So please give us a call.
It made me think. I have the idea for a future episode. So in City Slickers, you remember that guy Curly sitting on
Yes,
top of the
sir.
horse, and he says, "Oh, you city folk come in here wanting to know that one thing, make you happy," or something along those lines. Er-
One thing.
Everyone's waiting for the pearl for him to offer. And I think Billy Crystal's character says, "Yeah, what? Give it to us, Curly." He says, "That's for you to figure out." That reminds me of this message.
Hmm.
It's to be made. That is the one gem. Oh, and then we have so much to talk about, so little time, Brandon.
There'll be another episode.
Well, I like it. I like it. I like where we're headed. Brandon, thanks for joining us. Thank you for tuning in again, friends. We hope you'll continue to subscribe, like, and ring the bell. It's been a great conversation. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on ways in which you try to promote happiness in your family. As always, draw your attention to our helpline. For those just listening, it is 833-503-0348. Trained counselors are available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day of the week. And if you're in need, give them a call. Thanks again for tuning in. Take care. Hope you have a good rest of the day.